Welcome back to the channel, and in this video, it's going to be covering coaches that are potentially on college football coaches that are potentially on the hot seat for the upcoming 2024 season. You know, obviously, coaching in college football is probably one of the most demanding occupations on planet Earth. It's never a 100% exact science to being successful outside of winning games. Of course, there's a lot of details and a lot of a lot of nuances that goes into this profession. You know, nutrition plan, strength and conditioning, your recruiting on basically a day in and day out basis. Recruiting is 12 months a year, just not just for the upcoming recruiting class, but for next year's as well, so you can establish a good foundation. But coaching is not an easy sport. It's not an easy profession in any sport whatsoever. And I think college football coaches, probably the most demanding of all the coaching that is in sports today, even more so than professional sports, right? Because NFL coaches don't have the schedule that college football head coaches do. You could argue that the level of play in the NFL is higher, but the demand in college football, I think, is just a tad bit higher. But that's just a personal opinion. Doesn't mean that I'm right. Some of you may disagree, and that's totally fine. So in this video, we're going to be talking about coaches that are on the hot seat this year. As you can see, I've selected eight men. In some categories, I think they are definitely on the hot seat. In other cases, I think that seat may not necessarily be it may not necessarily be hot, but it's starting to warm up a little bit. And some coaches I think are not entirely out of the woods yet, meaning they came off of a pretty good year, but could use another one just to ensure that they will be coaching in the next season after this upcoming one. So we're gonna start off in Virginia right here. Here's the coach, Tony Elliott. He was the former offensive coordinator for the Clemson Tigers before he accepted the Virginia job. In Charlottesville, this guy has a win-loss record of 6-16, won 3 games each. He was 3-7 his first year, 3-9 last year. 3-7, the game was a couple of games was cut short at the end of the year because of the tragedy that Virginia went through. But even though, despite that, he still has not done a pretty good job. He still has done a pretty bad job coaching in Charlottesville, Virginia. Conference record 1-6 in his first year. Went 3-7. Beat Richmond in his opening debut. Lost to Illinois a week after, beat Old Dominion in a very close matchup, and he just went went 1-6 the final 7 games of the year, losing to Syracuse, losing to Duke, losing to Louisville, losing to Georgia Tech, losing to Miami. Almost, it was a very close matchup between he and Virginia and Miami that year, but still could not pull the trigger to win the game. Lost to North Carolina as well, and got absolutely blown out by Pitt. The very next year, they went 3-9. And the only difference is he won one more conference game than he did last year. Gets blown out by Tennessee, but that was really no surprise. I mean, I did not think Virginia had a chance in that game. Loses to James Madison at home, and then in the aforementioned game against Old Dominion, he barely won that one, so he could have lost to 2 non-Power 5 schools back to back. Lost to Maryland, lost to North Carolina State and Boston College, beat William and Mary, got a nice upset victory against North Carolina, by far the biggest victory of his entire career. Would lose a couple more games after that. Went toe-to-toe with Louisville, but did not win that game. And then he got a nice victory against Duke at the end of the season before getting blown out by Virginia Tech, who will be mentioned in this video as well. So right now for Tony Elliott, you're going to have to really start winning some football games, and that's not going to be easy in the ACC, which has completely gotten rid of divisional play format, and they're adding in California, Stanford, and SMU. So the conference is not going to get any easier for Mr. Elliott. Next on this list, Billy Napier. I mean, not much more needs to be, not a lot really needs to be explained, but for the purpose of this video, I'll still explain it. I've ripped Billy Napier to shreds over the last few months, and deservingly so. I've given him credit when I thought that he's deserved it as well. Love his recruiting. I think he is a guy that players do want to play for, and people do want to see him succeed in Florida. It's not like he's an unlikable guy necessarily. He's a guy that does believe in building a process to running a college football team, but he's just had blunder after blunder after blunder after blunder and has not been able to build on momentum that he looks like he was starting to build, and then something happens and he loses all of it. He lost out on that great recruiting class that he had built up throughout the summer. He lost games, a few games to a couple of games to Arkansas and Vanderbilt that he had no business losing. He's bad on the road. He has back-to-back losing records in conference play. He has never beaten Kentucky, LSU, Georgia, or Florida State. He's 0 for 8 against those four teams. And it's one thing to go winless against Georgia, Kentucky, Georgia, Florida State, and LSU, but to never beat Kentucky is unacceptable. That's just unacceptable. I mean, yeah, Dan Mullen's the first coach at Florida to lose to Kentucky in quite some time, but he at the very least still got a couple of victories. Um, and for Billy Napier, his seat is on fire. It's just he just has to win some games at Florida this year, and it's not going to be easy considering the fact that he has 11 Power 5 opponents. So he has no room for error. But a lot of it was due to his own mistakes that he's made in staff hires. Waiting until year 3 to hire an actual special teams coach. Not recognizing that there was an issue with Florida strength and conditioning until a year or two late. And obviously, I've questioned his play calling in the past as well. So, Billy Napier, he's on the hot seat for the Florida Gators this upcoming season and a tough schedule that's coming up. This one is what I call smoke alarm beeping. And what I mean by that is they're not necessarily on the hot they may not be on the hot seat, but the tension is starting to build. So like when your smoke alarm goes off, the house isn't necessarily on fire, but the smoke is starting to build. You need to do something now while you have the chance before things get worse. Dave Aranda for me is on this list. He won a Big 12 championship game 2 years ago. I'm pulling up his resume on my computer real quick, so I'm sorry if it's taking a little bit. 4 seasons at Baylor, 3 of them are losing records, so that's not good at all. 4 seasons at Baylor, he is 23-25 as the Baylor Bears' head coach. He did win a Sugar Bowl in 2021. He did win the Big 12 championship, like I said. But other than that, 3 losing records, 2-7 in 2020, which is the pandemic year. But you can give him a little bit of a break, being that it was the pandemic and things were thrown off kilter for everybody on planet Earth that year. Then after the 12-2 season, which they won the Big 12, they fell off to 6-7. So your win total got cut in half, and then your win total for 2022, when you were 6-7, got cut in half again, going 3-9. He's a guy, and then the Big 12 is kind of wide open this year with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, but they're adding in new teams like Utah and Colorado and Arizona State. So the Big 12 to me is going to be a very interesting conference to watch. But for a guy who's coming off of 2 back-to-back losing records and a 3-9 season at that, for Dave Aranda, you definitely need to be winning some games this upcoming season. Another guy who needs to win some games this upcoming season, Brett Bielema at Illinois. Brett Bielema was a head coach at Wisconsin and won a Big 10 title during his time at Wisconsin. Won it in, I believe it was 2010 or 2000. It was 2000. Might have been 2011. Because that was when he had Russell Wilson. He leaves Wisconsin to go coach at Arkansas. He could never really muster up any big time success in Fayetteville, so he goes back to the Big Ten, and 3 seasons at Illinois, 2 losing records, and he fell off in 2023 after having a pretty respectable 2022, in which the team went 8-5, lost in the bowl game, but to still go 8-4 in the Big Ten, which is not an easy conference to coach in, is pretty good. But they fell off last year. So I have his the 2021 season pulled up right here. Lost to UTSA, which is not good. Lost to Virginia, which is not good. Again, so a couple of back-to-back bad losses right there after winning his debut against Nebraska. Lost to Purdue, kind of a horizontal, kind of two programs that are kind of at the same level in terms of college football. Purdue being more of a basketball school. Just losing record, 4-5 conference record in 2021. Next year goes 8-5, goes 5-4. Granted, it was in the Big Ten West, which is the easier division of this conference because the Big Ten East is so loaded. But they go 8-4 in the regular season, losing their bowl game to Mississippi State. And then last year they go 5-7, 3-6 in the conference play. They beat Toledo. They lose to Kansas. They get blown out by Penn State. They struggle against Florida Atlantic at home, and then they just went on the tailspin of loss and misery. They went 3-5 their final 8 games of the year. They get a couple of these games right here against Minnesota and Indiana. Indiana they beat by 3 points. Minnesota they lost by 1 point. So you could have, and Maryland by 3 points. So you could have flipped those into losses. And Brett Bielema having 2 losing records out of 3 seasons, you can certainly believe that the smoke is building up for Illinois to improve next year. Otherwise, he could be out of a job yet again. This one kind of hurts a little bit to talk about. Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman is one of the more respected head coaches in college football today. A long time offensive line coach, really had to cut his teeth and had to wait a long time in order to get the job in Fayetteville. I'm pulling up his schedules right here. When he took over for Arkansas, they were coming off the heels of that horrendous Chad Morris administration. Chad Morris, in my opinion, was the worst Power 5 head coaching hire of the 2010s decades. I mean, they were absolutely terrible. And even by Arkansas standards, which they don't necessarily have national title standards like you would say LSU, Auburn, or Alabama, but Chad Morris was absolutely bad for the Razorbacks. 3-7 in the year in his very first year where they were in the pandemic, so you can't really hold that too much against them. Then the very next year, they went 9-4. I'm waiting for the schedule to load up. They went 9-4, and they got a nice victory against Texas, and that put a smile on a lot of Arkansas fans. Being that their historic rivalry with Texas, they won the Outback Bowl. They looked pretty impressive in their victory. They looked like a team that knew how to win in the trenches. There was at one point where they were actually ranked in the top 10 before they quickly fell out. But it was just good to see Arkansas, actually start to develop an identity as a football team. Gave the Alabama Tigers a run for their money. Went on the road and was able to beat LSU, beat Mississippi State, was able to beat Penn State, who made the Outback Bowl against them. 2022 fell off. That's when they fell right back off. I don't want to say no. They didn't fall off in 2022. They fell off in 2023. They were 7-6 in 2022, so that's my mistake. Got a nice victory against Cincinnati and South Carolina, so they started off 3-0. Then they lost 3 straight. They were able to beat Auburn. They won on the road at BYU the week before. They lost to some more ranked teams, Liberty, LSU, and Ole Miss. But they were able to close out their season with a victory against Kansas in the Liberty Bowl. So a decent victory to end the season that season for Sam Pittman. Arkansas was just awful the very next year. They were 1-8 against Power 5 opponents last year, losing to BYU, who was officially a Big 12 school last year. Their only victory in conference play came against Florida. They were just bad the rest of the way. Sam Pittman is getting a second chance for Arkansas, and I think he needs to make the most of it if he wants to keep coaching there. Justin Wilcox, I thought this dude was on the hot seat last year. This guy has been coaching at California. Has been a head coach longer than anybody else on this list. He's been coaching California since 2015. I want to make sure that's correctly. Yes, so 2017. That's when he was hired. 5-7 first year, 7-6, 8-5 the next 2 years afterwards, and now he's had 4 consecutive losing records: 6-7 last year, 4-8 last year, 5-7 the year before that, and 1-3 in the pandemic year, which was a shortened year for the Pac-12. But still, no Power 5 program should accept 5 consecutive losing records. And here's a couple of head coaches that are not necessarily out of the woods. They coming off of pretty respectable seasons last year, but it would still help them a little bit just to build upon that. One in particular, Brent Pry for Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. Now, what's going to help him is that he has a lot of returning juniors and seniors for him last year, returning to this year that were on the team last year. 2022, the Hokies were not good at all. They went 3-8. They went 3-8. Lost to Old Dominion right at the first game of the year. Got dominated by Boston College, who was not a good football team that year. West Virginia, their head coach Neil Brown is going to get talked about right afterwards. Getting blown out by North Carolina, Pitt. Was kind of dominated by Miami, even though the score was a little close. They tried to make a comeback rally at the end. Almost got a nice on-the-road victory at North Carolina State, but they were just 1 point short of doing that. 1 point loss to Georgia Tech as well, so they could have had a couple more victories in their book. Lost to Duke, who was pretty good that year under Mike Elko, and and their final victory came against Liberty. And then last year, things got better. 5-3 conference record, 4 more victories than what they had the previous year. Lost 3 after beating Old Dominion They lost 3 straight, one of which to Marshall and Sunbelt. But then they pulled off a dominating victory against Pitt, got blown out by Florida State. Dominated Wake Forest and Syracuse, got blown out by Louisville, and then had another dominant win against Boston College, and really blew out their in-state rivals, Virginia, and was able to pull off a nice victory against Tulane in the Military Bowl. So a good season for Brent Pry, considering how the first year went, but for a fact he's going to need to build upon that if he wants to continue coaching for the Hokies. Another guy who was kind of on the hot seat, but kind of saved himself last year, Neil Brown. I guess I didn't. Here he is. Neil Brown. Sorry, I forgot where he was. Neil Brown. He was at the top left. Had 5-7 record in his opening year at West Virginia. 6-4 the very next year. 6-7, 5-7, and the conference play that West Virginia was performing was just not good. They were 3-6 last year. 4-5 the year before that, and their victory against Oklahoma was the first time they beat a conference opponent at home in a long time under Neil Brown. So they were struggling, but last year 9-4 record, 6-3 in conference play. Lost to Penn State, but Penn State was a pretty good team last year, so not surprising. Beat Duquesne, which is expected. Beat backyard brawl opponent Pitt to get rematch for what happened the year beforehand. Got another victory against Texas Tech and TCU. Had a couple of losses to Houston and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, respectable team, went on to play in the Big 12 championship game later on that season. Dominating victories against UCF, BYU. Got blown out by Oklahoma, but they were a pretty good team, building themselves up to be a pretty good team towards the end of the year. And then were able to end on a 3-game winning streak, beating Cincinnati, Baylor, North Carolina in their bowl game. So just like Brent Pry, Neil Brown needs to build upon the good success that he got off of last year. So those are my picks for coaches that are potentially on the hot seat that could potentially end up on a hot seat towards the end of the season. May possibly be fired in the cases of Pittman, Aranda, Napier, and Tony Elliott. So that's my video. I appreciate y'all watching, and another video coming up soon.